A calculated insult. That's all it was. A lavish invitation extended solely to humiliate her. But when she graced the party radiating quiet regality, the room hushed. And he, the orchestrator, never truly recovered. It began as a smirk-fueled dare, a secret shared over expensive bourbon in a hushed private office, seemingly lost to the world. Richard Callahan, leaning against the towering windows of his 32nd floor real estate firm in Stamford, Connecticut, idly tapped the glass. Below, the bustling streets he rarely traversed blurred into insignificance. Behind him, 3 cronies sprawled in leather armchairs, their laughter and clinking glasses a prelude to Richard's upcoming Hamptons birthday bash. All right, hear me out, Richard declared, turning from the panorama. What if I invited Denise? You know, the cleaning lady with the loud earrings? Imagine her face when she gets a gold-embossed invite to a black-tie Hamptons event. A roar of laughter erupted. Michael Cray, his longtime golf buddy, nearly sloshed his scotch. Dude, no. She'd probably show up with a mop and bucket. Richard beamed, soaking in the reaction. It'll be our little inside joke. I'll even have the valet ready with a rag and Windex. It was a cruel jest, but in their circles, cruelty often wore the mask of playful banter. Denise Walton, the quiet black woman who meticulously cleaned their offices every other evening around 7, was practically invisible to them. Her name, a fleeting memory only conjured by coffee spills or dusty baseboards. But Denise? She remembered everything. That Tuesday evening as she emptied the break room trash, Denise caught the sting of her name. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop. It wasn't her way. Yet the slightly ajar door had funneled their voices, using her name as a punchline. She's not gonna come, one of them sneered. People like that know their place. She froze, trash bag clutched in her gloved hand. No anger. No flinch. Just a profound, heavy stillness. The next morning, an embossed envelope awaited her in the cleaning supply closet. It felt real, authentic enough to convey sincerity. A pristine white card with gold script. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 62nd birthday of Richard Callahan at his summer estate in Bridgehampton. Black tie attire required. Saturday 7 p.m. No RSVP. No expectation. Just the hollow echo of feigned kindness. Denise stared at the card that evening. She didn't weep. She didn't laugh. Instead, she folded it with careful precision, slipped it into her handbag and returned to buffing the floors. Because what they failed to grasp was this. Denise Walton was no stranger to disrespect. She had navigated rooms where she was unwelcome, raised 3 children on 2 jobs, mourned a husband, paid off her home and conquered breast cancer. All without missing a single week of work. A fake invitation wouldn't shatter her. But it did spark an idea. A quiet, graceful one. The following day she took personal time informing her supervisor. She visited Miss Rena, her hairdresser in Bridgeport, a haven she hadn't seen in over a year, scheduling a press and style. Then a second-hand boutique, a treasure trove of gowns once worn by women who truly graced galas. She selected a navy blue dress with a draped neckline, classic, simple, understated. There was no flash, no ostentation, only the quiet power it exuded when she tried it on. And that quiet power was about to confront a room brimming with people who believed they already knew the end of her story. By Friday afternoon, the guest list was finalized. 162 names, each meticulously chosen. Most were affluent enough to disregard price tags. Former senators, art collectors, a smattering of young influencers invited purely for contemporary relevance. Caterers from Montauk, a lighting crew, truckloads of peonies from the florist, the driveway re-gravelled, every detail curated for a spectacular evening, a grand display of control, power and legacy. Amidst the chaos of engraved champagne flutes and drone light show preparations, Richard's assistant, Kyle, chuckled softly as he logged the funny invite into the database. Wait, Denise Walton? The cleaner? He squinted, entering the name. Yeah, Richard called from his desk, not bothering to look up. Make sure her name's at the bottom. No +1. Let's see if she actually thinks she belongs. Kyle smirked, his fingers hovering for a second, then pressed save and moved on. The joke became a sort of internal currency, traded behind champagne smiles and cufflink compliments. That Saturday morning at the Hamptons beach house where Richard and his guests prepared, Denise's name surfaced again, a punchline in a mock red carpet scenario. "So Richard," laughed a woman named Reagan, her voice like sandpaper, her money equally abrasive, "is your cleaning crew doing walkthroughs now? I mean, what if she actually shows up? You'll have to offer her turn-down service." Even the caterer, Hector, overheard fragments while unloading trays. He'd worked events like these for 12 years and knew better than to speak, but the disgust in his eyes was undeniable. Most attendees wouldn't recognize Denise. But Richard's inner circle? They were waiting just in case. Waiting for the sheer absurdity of someone like her invading their carefully constructed world. It wasn't about her as a person. It was about her presence disrupting their polished image. Not everyone found it amusing. Kyle's girlfriend, Brenna, a law student from Yonkers, overheard part of the conversation on the drive to the estate. "So this Denise woman," she said casually, "you all invited her just to mess with her?" Richard waved a dismissive hand. "It's just for fun. Harmless. It's not like she's actually coming. She works for you." "She cleans," Brenna pointed out. "She doesn't work for me. She works in the building," Richard corrected. "There's a difference." Brenna didn't press, but she made a mental note, the kind of silent accounting some people keep when they realize those around them aren't who they pretend to be. By late afternoon, the estate glowed in anticipation. Waiters in black moved like clockwork. Cars already glided down the long circular driveway. Photographers hovered near the entrance, capturing arriving guests in their finery. Denise hadn't arrived, but the atmosphere was already turning venomous. One man whispered to his wife, "If she shows up, I bet she doesn't even know how to use the right fork." His wife giggled. "She might think the wine glasses are for decoration." The sad truth was they genuinely believed it. In a room full of art degrees and haute couture, they had convinced themselves that humility equated to ignorance, that someone who cleaned lacked all refinement. What they hadn't anticipated was someone like Denise carrying herself with unwavering poise in a room they believed she couldn't enter without flinching, without stumbling, without begging for space. Because while they were trading insults disguised as hors d'oeuvres, Denise Walton was standing before a mirror across town, adjusting the sleeves of her gown, pinning a small silver brooch near her collarbone. She didn't need to practice her walk. Her mother had taught her years ago, "You walk like you've already been where you're going." But no one at that party was prepared for her to walk through those doors as if she belonged there more than any of them. Denise Walton had always possessed an innate ability to read a room. You don't grow up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the eldest of 5, with a sickly mother and a part-time father, without learning to scan faces before mouths open. She didn't need the full sentence in Richard's office that night. She understood the game the moment she saw her name on that invitation. It was meant to belittle her. But Denise wasn't built that way. She wasn't a woman you could diminish with a laugh. When she arrived home that night, she placed the invitation on her kitchen table, beside a chipped teacup and a stack of utility bills. Her small one-story home was quiet. Her children grown, scattered across the country, immersed in lives she'd helped build. The television hummed softly with a Family Feud rerun, but she barely registered it. She simply stared at the gold script on that heavy cardstock and thought, "They think I won't come. Not because I can't, but because they think I shouldn't." She thought of her late husband, Terrence. He used to tell her, "People confuse wealth with worth. Don't ever let them hand you their rules and expect you to live by them." She still heard his voice sometimes when the house was too quiet. The next morning, Denise opened her closet. There wasn't much beyond work uniforms and church dresses she hadn't worn in a year. She stood still for a moment, then picked up her phone and called Miss Rena, who had done her hair since the early 90s. "Baby," Rena said, hearing the request, "you going somewhere?" "Yes, ma'am," Denise replied. "I've got a party to attend." She could feel Rena's smile through the phone. Later that day, Denise took a city bus to an upscale consignment shop in Fairfield. She browsed in silence. No assistant rushed to help her, no one asked what she sought. But she moved slowly, deliberately, her eyes scanning fabrics the way another might study paintings. And there it was. A navy silk gown with long sleeves and a neckline that dipped just enough to be elegant without being audacious. Clean lines. No sequins. No lace. Just dignity. The saleswoman gave her a sidelong glance when she asked to try it on. Denise didn't take it personally. She'd seen that look before, a look older than both of them. She tried on the dress, turned before the mirror and smiled quietly. Not because it made her feel different but because it simply matched the woman she already was. At the counter, the saleswoman asked, "Is it for a special occasion?" Denise met her gaze. "You could say that." On Saturday evening, just before 6:30, Denise stepped out of a rideshare car in front of the Callahan estate. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. Not her supervisor, not her children, not Rena. The driver offered to open the door. She gently declined. The estate was immense. Columns, imported stone, valet boys scurrying under fairy lights. A violinist played something classical near the hedges. Guests milled about, champagne flutes in hand, laughing, glancing over their shoulders to see who was arriving. Denise clutched her handbag in one hand and walked up the gravel path without hesitation. Her heels didn't wobble, her posture didn't falter. Every step was deliberate. The first to see her was a hostess. She scanned the guest list, looked up at Denise, then back at the list. "Name." "Denise Walton," she said calmly. "Pause. A long one." Then the hostess cleared her throat. "Of course. Right this way." Heads turned. Conversations faltered. No one spoke immediately, but the atmosphere shifted. The silence wasn't awkward. It was startled, like distant thunder on a cloudless day. Richard hadn't seen her yet, but in less than 2 minutes, the man who had turned her into a joke was about to confront the part of Denise he had never bothered to see. Denise stepped inside as if she'd been there 100 times. The foyer was vast, marble floors reflecting the chandelier's light above. A curved staircase, flanked by 2 hired violinists playing something slow and expensive. She took her time, letting her eyes adjust, letting the weight of the room settle. A woman near the entrance, adorned in a gold gown that seemed to come with its own security detail, whispered to her partner, "Is she with the staff?" Her partner squinted. "I don't think so. She just walked in through the front." Denise caught fragments, not all but enough. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She simply kept walking, the kind of walk born from years of being stared at. In grocery lines, banks, interviews, everywhere someone expected less. A young waiter with nervous eyes approached, holding a silver tray. "Champagne, ma'am." She took one, thanked him, and offered him the kind of smile that steadies a shaking hand. "You're doing fine, baby," she whispered. He nodded once, surprised, before melting back into the crowd. At the far end of the room, near the bar, Richard Callahan was roaring with laughter, his face flushed, surrounded by sycophants who always laughed a little too readily at his jokes. He didn't see her at first, but others had begun to notice. Someone pointed. A few turned. More stopped mid-sentence. By the time Richard turned around, half the room was watching her. He saw the gown first, then the posture, then the face. For half a second, his composure fractured, just long enough to reveal the panic beneath the smirk. She wasn't supposed to come. And she certainly wasn't supposed to look like that. He plastered on a grin, walked over, arms outstretched as if they were old friends. "Denise. Well, look at you." She held her ground. "Mr. Callahan. Come on, we're at a party. Call me Richard." His voice was too loud, too strained, the kind of voice used to regain control of a room. "You look great," he added, scanning her dress, still trying to comprehend how this was happening. "Thank you. I figured since you invited me I should show up." Simple. No sarcasm. No bite. Just truth delivered with a straight back. He hesitated. "Of course. You're welcome here." He gestured around. "Everyone's welcome tonight. All about celebrating life, right?" Behind him some guests whispered. A few younger ones pulled out phones, feigning text checks but secretly trying to Google her name. Denise didn't flinch. She sipped her champagne and turned to survey the room. "You have a lovely home." "Thank you," Richard said quickly. "You want to meet some people?" She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Sure." He began introducing her to a few people, faces she'd only seen on magazine covers or in framed photos while cleaning boardrooms. But now they were shaking her hand, asking about her dress, some out of politeness, others out of genuine curiosity. One woman, slightly older, in a deep red dress, leaned in and asked, "Are you an artist?" Denise smiled. "No, ma'am. I clean offices downtown." There was the hush, the blink, the recalibration. "Oh," the woman said, caught off guard. Well, you wear that dress better than half the people here. Denise chuckled. I didn't come to compete. Just came because I was invited. Another pause. Then the woman laughed, not fake, not forced, but real. Well, I'm glad you did. The conversation began to shift, not all at once, but subtly. The questions weren't about why she came anymore. They were about who she was. And Denise? She answered the same way she lived. Soft but firm, honest and without apology. But Richard was still watching from the corner, and for the first time in a long time he wasn't the one dictating the room. Richard wasn't accustomed to feeling irrelevant at his own parties. He stood by the grand piano, watching Denise like a man attempting to decipher a magic trick happening before his very eyes. His drink sat untouched. The laughter around him felt distant. He smiled when people glanced his way, but the smile never reached his eyes. He had expected Denise to be uncomfortable, quiet, out of place, perhaps even grateful for the invitation. He hadn't expected her to move as if she had nothing to prove. Now conversations swirled around her. A state senator's wife had pulled her aside to inquire about her brooch. A tech investor from Seattle nodded intently as Denise spoke of raising children in Bridgeport and working 2 jobs. Even the live jazz band had shifted to a softer melody, as if the entire room had undergone a subtle transformation. And it had. Richard turned to Kyle, who had been trying hard to remain inconspicuous. Did you know she was actually coming? Kyle shrugged, his eyes darting. She RSVP'd. You didn't think to tell me that? You said it was a joke. Richard clenched his jaw but said nothing. Instead he began walking not toward Denise but toward the bartenders. A plan was forming. Bring out the caviar tower, he barked to one of the staff. Now. I want more noise in this room, more flash. Yes, sir. He snatched a mic from the band's setup and tapped it a few times. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a quick moment to thank you all for being here tonight. The room quieted. Glasses clinked. Heads turned. Denise stood near the center, not attempting to blend in but not seeking attention either. She simply looked at him, calm and unreadable. This evening is about celebration, Richard continued, pacing slowly. About friends, family, hard work and surprises. Polite laughter rippled, a few eyes flickering toward Denise, already sensing the shift. And sometimes, he added with a grin that felt distinctly wrong, we're reminded that life throws unexpected guests our way. There was. The temperature in the room dipped ever so slightly. But that's what makes nights like this memorable, right? Denise didn't blink. Didn't frown. She simply sipped her drink and waited. Anyway, Richard said, trying to steer the mood back. Eat, drink, enjoy the jazz. The caviar is flowing. He handed the mic back, forced a few pats on the back as he walked away, and stopped just behind the bar, pretending to inspect something. A man near the fireplace turned to Denise and muttered under his breath, "Well, that was awkward." She looked at him. "Only if you think it was about me." The man blinked, chuckled, and extended his hand. "Wesley Granger. Denise Walton. I'm guessing you weren't on the original A-list." "I was on the list," she said. "That's what matters." Wesley raised his glass. "Damn right." The air began to shift again. One guest, Brenna, Kyle's girlfriend, walked over to Denise and asked if she could sit with her. Then another. And slowly the crowd around Richard began to thin. He noticed, of course. At one point, a younger woman from a fashion startup asked Denise if she'd ever considered writing a book. Denise laughed softly. "About what?" "About being exactly who you are in a room full of people who never thought you'd walk in." Denise shook her head, smiling. "You don't need a book for that. You just need a mirror." A ripple of laughter and admiration followed. This time Denise didn't hide it, she smiled back. But Richard, now standing alone by the catering table, realized the room he had meticulously crafted to celebrate himself was now orbiting someone else entirely. By the time dessert trays made their rounds, Denise Walton wasn't just a guest. She was the conversation. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was subtle, the way true respect tends to be. People leaned in when she spoke. They remembered her name. Even those who had raised their eyebrows earlier were now nodding along to her words. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She spoke as she always had, clear, thoughtful, unbothered by the social charade unfolding around her. At one point she found herself seated at a long table with 6 other guests. 2 venture capitalists, an art dealer, a retired news anchor, and an older couple from Greenwich who owned half the buildings on their block. None of them had anticipated spending the night listening to a woman in a second-hand gown discuss life, but that's precisely what they were doing. "So you raised 3 children?" the news anchor inquired. "Yes," Denise said, folding her napkin on her lap. 3. All grown now. My oldest is a teacher in Hartford, my middle one's in Tulsa, works in logistics, and the youngest just started their own landscaping business down in Tallahassee." "You must be proud," the woman said. "I am," Denise nodded. "Not because they make money but because they care about people. That's what I taught them. Doesn't matter how much you got if you don't know how to treat folks." The table fell quiet for a moment. Across from her the art dealer leaned in. "Did you always know you'd raise them on your own?" Denise looked at him, not sharply but directly. "No one ever knows that. You just do what needs doing. My husband passed when my youngest was 10. Heart failure. I was working night shifts at the time, cleaning banks and waiting tables on weekends. Sometimes we didn't have enough, but we never had nothing." There was no bitterness in her voice, just plain truth. "And the cleaning job?" the man asked carefully. "You still?" "I do," she said. 3 nights a week. Office work keeps me busy and it's honest. I've never been ashamed of it." She could feel the room tilting again, not because people pitied her, but because they were adjusting their perception of what strength truly looked like. Near the end of the table, the retired news anchor gazed into her wine glass. "We spend our whole lives pretending we're different," she said quietly, "but I think we all want the same thing, peace." Denise nodded. "And maybe a little respect along the way." Someone laughed softly. Another guest nodded. A few feet away, Richard watched from a high-top table, swirling ice in an empty glass. He wasn't laughing anymore. He hadn't laughed in over an hour. Kyle leaned over to him. "Do you want me to ask her to keep it low-key?" Richard looked at him, annoyed. "Low-key? She's not doing anything. She's kind of becoming the story." "I am the story," Richard snapped under his breath. "Not tonight," Kyle said, then walked off. Richard looked down at his phone. Nothing new. No messages. No distractions. Just the growing reality that he had planned a party to celebrate himself. And now the most talked-about guest was the woman he had invited as a joke. Meanwhile, Denise stood up and excused herself from the table. She made her way toward the back veranda, where the night air was cooler and the chatter softer. She wasn't tired, but she liked space, always had. Out on the patio, a young woman with braids and a velvet clutch joined her. She had been quiet all evening, hanging back, unsure of how to enter conversations that felt too old, too wealthy, too closed off. "I just wanted to say," she began, "that you made this place feel human tonight." Denise offered. "And what's your name, baby?" "Callie," the girl replied. "I came here as a +1. Thought I'd be invisible all night." "You don't need permission to be seen," Denise said. "Just keep showing up." Callie exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for an hour. "Thank you." Denise looked out over the lawn, where fairy lights glowed faintly above the hedges. She didn't need the cameras or the compliments. The room had seen her, that was enough. But there was still one moment left in the evening, and it would come with a question no one saw coming. Back inside, the party began to wind down. The music had softened. Servers cleared empty glasses and small circles of conversation dotted the vast hall like candle flames in the dark. Denise re-entered the room just as someone called for a toast. Richard's college friend, Douglas Whitner, a hedge fund executive with an inherited vineyard and a perpetual smirk, raised his glass at the head table. "To Richard," Douglas declared. "The man of the hour. The king of real estate and the host of the year." A wave of applause rippled through the room. Richard grinned, clinking glasses with those closest to him, beginning to feel a sense of control returning. Then Douglas glanced toward Denise, who had taken a seat beside Callie near the middle of the room. "And to our most unexpected guest tonight," Douglas said, lifting his glass again. "Miss, what's your name again?" The room tensed. Denise didn't flinch. "Denise Walton." "Right. Denise Walton." Douglas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, cheers to you. I think I speak for a few of us when I say it takes guts to show up where you don't quite fit in." A few people chuckled, unsure whether to laugh or not. Richard's face fell. It was the wrong joke at the wrong time. Denise set her glass down slowly, turned toward Douglas. She didn't raise her voice, didn't narrow her eyes. She simply spoke in the same calm, even tone she used when breaking up fights between her kids growing up. "Well, I appreciate the toast," she said, "but I didn't show up to fit in. I showed up because I was invited." The room went quiet. "Now, whether or not I fit, that's not really for you to decide, is it?" Someone near the back of the room said softly, Just that, a sound of agreement that hung in the silence like a bell. Denise continued, still without heat, just truth. "People like you," she said, looking straight at Douglas, "like to think you're gatekeepers. That if you laugh at something it's not cruel, it's just wit. That if someone like me walks in, it's a surprise instead of a choice." She paused. "But see, I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front, announced, dressed right, minded my manners, and still here we are." Douglas shifted in his seat, his smirk fading. "I've worked in rooms just like this for 25 years, she added. "Wiping windows, vacuuming carpets, scrubbing out stains you'll never notice because someone like me takes care of it before you even see it. And tonight, all I did was put on a dress and come through the front door, and somehow that's the part that's hard to swallow." The silence was profound now, not awkward, just real. Richard stood frozen. He knew this wasn't about a joke anymore. The room had shifted again, and this time it wasn't going back. Denise sat back, picked up her glass, and ended with, "I came here out of respect for the invitation, for myself, for the space. But make no mistake, I didn't come here for your approval. I've lived a full life without it. And that was it. No mic drop. No dramatic walkout. Just words that landed like bricks in a room made of glass." People stared. A few blinked hard. Some looked down at their drinks, unsure what to say. Then Callie clapped. Once. Twice. Then more. And then others joined in. Not the performative kind of applause, but the slow, steady kind. The kind that says, "We heard you." Douglas sank into his chair. Richard sat with his hands folded. Suddenly a man at his own party who couldn't reclaim the stage. Denise didn't stand or bow or react. She just smiled softly and continued sipping her champagne. But after that moment the party wasn't the same. Because now everyone there knew exactly who the most important person in the room really was. After Denise spoke, the party didn't erupt back into its usual laughter. It softened, shifted, the kind of shift you feel more than see. No one danced. No one called for another toast. Even the band seemed to ease into quieter rhythms, as if they too understood the changed mood. People began approaching her, not in a rush, not with fanfare, but with something closer to sincerity. A gray-haired man with tortoiseshell glasses offered his hand and said, "Ma'am, I've never been checked so gently in all my life." His wife stood beside him, nodding. Denise shook his hand. It wasn't about checking anyone. Just telling the truth. He nodded. That's what made it land. A younger woman, perhaps mid-20s, approached next. She wore a sleek green dress and nervously held a wine glass with both hands. "Hi, I just wanted to say that what you said really, it meant something." Denise smiled gently. "You've been quiet all night." "I didn't know how to fit in either," the girl said. "But after hearing you, I feel like maybe it's not about fitting in at all." Denise tilted her head. "Baby, the day you stop shrinking to make others comfortable is the day you start living on your terms." The girl's eyes welled. She mouthed a quiet thank you, and walked away with a look that promised she'd remember this night for years. At the same time, near the patio doors, Brenna was whispering to Kyle, her voice low but sharp. "You all humiliated her, and she still showed more grace than anyone here." Kyle didn't argue. He just stood still, staring across the room at Denise. She walked in like she knew she belonged. "That's power," Brenna added before stepping away and disappearing into the crowd. Richard remained seated near the back wall, watching it all unfold like a movie he was no longer a part of. Every time he opened his mouth he couldn't find the right words. He wanted to defend himself, to say it wasn't that serious, that the invitation was a misunderstanding. But even he didn't believe that. And worse, everyone else had stopped pretending to. For years, Richard had measured his value in assets and applause. But tonight, applause belonged to someone else, and she hadn't even asked for it. He tried to stand once, perhaps to make a final speech or reassert control, but his feet didn't move. Instead he sat back down and adjusted his cufflinks. Elsewhere, Denise had stepped outside again, this time with a few others trailing behind. A circle of people now sat with her under the outdoor heaters. People from different backgrounds, different ages, just talking. Nothing fancy, just honesty. Someone asked her, "So, when you're not working or raising kids, what do you do for you?" Denise paused. "I garden. I read. I cook for people who actually eat the food without complaining." That drew a few laughs. "I like to learn things," she added. "Always felt like if I stopped learning, I'd stop growing." A man beside her said, "Ever think about doing talks? Like to groups, schools even? What you said earlier. People need to hear that." Denise shook her head gently. "I'm not a speaker." "You are now," he replied. Inside, a few of Richard's close friends whispered about leaving early, not because they had somewhere else to be, but because they felt an unadmitted discomfort, the kind that arises when a mirror is held up and the reflection isn't to your liking. By now, even the wait staff had slowed their movements around Denise, not out of awkwardness but respect. One young woman, working her first event, quietly slid Denise a plate of chocolate-covered strawberries and whispered, "I wish my aunt could have seen you tonight." Denise touched her hand briefly. "Tell her she's still in the room. You're carrying her." The girl smiled, then darted away before tears betrayed her. But even as the night grew quiet, there was one more moment to come. Because goodbyes, when they're earned, carry more weight than any entrance. By the time the final dessert tray had been cleared and the last song wrapped up, only a few guests remained. The mansion, once buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses, now echoed with the soft footsteps of people gathering their coats and car keys. Denise stood near the edge of the veranda, her arms resting gently on the stone railing as she looked out into the darkness beyond the garden lights. The crisp air settled over her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. She was used to colder nights than this. Inside, Callie came up behind her, holding her coat. "I thought you might need this." Denise smiled and slid her arms into the sleeves. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've been good company tonight." Callie beamed. "I learned more from you in 3 hours than I did in 4 years of school." "Well, school teaches you what's on paper. Life teaches you the rest." They shared a quiet moment. No one else was rushing them, no one was trying to move them along. From behind, Richard appeared at the door. He hesitated before stepping out, alone now, no entourage in tow, just him and whatever apology he had been crafting for the last 2 hours. Denise heard the door creak but didn't turn. She waited. He cleared his throat. "Denise." She turned slightly. "Richard." He let out a breath. "I just wanted to say, I didn't expect you to come tonight. I know He fumbled. "Look, the invite, it was meant to be light-hearted. I wasn't trying to humiliate you." "You did though," she said. "Maybe not in front of everyone, but when people like you laugh in rooms behind closed doors thinking the rest of us won't hear it, that still counts." Richard looked down. "I didn't come to shame you," Denise continued. "I came because I was invited. And because I wanted to show you something." He looked up, hopeful. "What's that?" "That you can't control how people see you, but you can control how you carry yourself." She stepped away from the railing. "You invited me thinking I'd be the punchline. Instead, I reminded you what it looks like when someone walks through fire and still stands tall." He didn't argue. He couldn't. He just nodded slightly, lips pressed tight. Denise stepped past him. Callie followed, quiet and respectful, as they walked through the now nearly empty hall. A few of the staff paused what they were doing and gave Denise small nods. One of the older servers even opened the door for her. Outside, her car was waiting. Not a limo, not a driver in uniform, just a regular black rideshare sedan with a polite man behind the wheel. He turned to Callie. "You need a ride?" Callie hesitated, then smiled. "Only if I can sit in the front." They laughed as the car pulled away. A few guests still lingering at the entrance watched them go. Some whispered. Some waved. And inside the mansion, Richard walked back toward the now empty ballroom where his name had been printed on every card, every menu, every balloon. For the first time in years, the silence made him uncomfortable, not because of its volume but because of its clarity. He sat down alone at one of the long tables, looked at the empty chair Denise had filled just hours before, and for once he didn't try to pretend he was the most important person in the room. As even he knew. But not all lessons hit like thunder. Some arrive quietly and they echo long after the music stops. Monday morning arrived as it always did. A gray sky, traffic humming, coffee pots brewing in office break rooms across Stamford. Denise Walton clocked in at 6 a.m., just as she had every Monday for years. Same sneakers, same uniform, same building. But everything else felt different. The woman at the security desk looked up and smiled wider than usual. "Morning, Miss Walton." Denise paused. "Morning, Judy." Inside the elevator, two junior analysts, young, sharply suited, and usually buried in their phones, both greeted her. One even held the door open. "Good weekend?" one asked. Denise looked straight ahead, smiled gently. "You could say that." By the time she reached the 32nd floor, she'd already heard bits of it. He was at the party. Spoke right to Mr. Callahan. Didn't blink. People were clapping, I swear, clapping. Word had gotten around, not through social media, not through gossip columns, but through whispers. Staff talk. Waiters who had gone home and told their cousins. Valets who told their sisters. Someone's nephew who had filmed just enough to send to a friend in the maintenance room. Denise hung her coat, pulled on her gloves, picked up her mop. She didn't need a podium or a title or a nameplate on a door. She already knew who she was. Meanwhile, back in the executive office, Richard sat at his desk in a building that now felt a little colder than it used to. His inbox was full, meetings stacked, but he couldn't stop thinking about Saturday night. That moment. The way the room had turned toward Denise like she was the only voice worth hearing. It wasn't anger he felt now. It was something heavier. A dull, uncomfortable kind of regret. He had money. Properties. Staff who jumped when he cleared his throat. But he didn't have what Denise had. Respect. And respect, he realized too late, can't be bought or demanded. It can only be earned. Later that afternoon he asked Kyle to call Denise to the office. She came in quietly, uniform still on, no makeup, just calm. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair. She didn't sit. "I owe you an apology," he said. She nodded. "Yes, you do." He looked up at her. "I'm sorry for everything. The invite. The way I minimized you." She tilted her head slightly. "You didn't minimize me. You just showed me how small you still think." The silence stretched. He swallowed. "Can I make it right?" Denise looked at him for a moment, then said, "Start by seeing the people who keep this place clean. Know their names. Know what they carry when they go home. And maybe stop using power to make jokes about people who work harder than you do." He nodded slowly. He looked older than he had Saturday night. Denise turned to go. At the door she paused. "One more thing," she added without turning back. "Invite someone because you want them there, not because you want them to know they weren't supposed to be." Then she left. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just finished. And for the first time in his career, Richard Callahan didn't have the last word. That night, Denise made dinner for herself at home. Turnip greens, fried catfish, macaroni that baked a little too long on the edges. She poured herself a glass of iced tea and turned the radio low. The world hadn't changed, but her place in it had gotten a little louder. Not because she fought for it with fists or force, but because she showed up, stood still, and made sure everyone saw her without having to raise her voice. Because dignity doesn't need permission and grace doesn't wait for applause.